examples of the conflict, but just kind of note the different forms of conflict that we're talking about. And then the last piece of the model is, how does this play out? What are some of the consequences that families and healthcare professionals experience when families are faced with these kinds of difficulties? And I think we identified 5 different consequences or categories. First of all, things can take longer with care planning. So when something needs to be done on behalf of the patient, it can take longer to get that accomplished, which can impact the quality of care and disrupt the patient's care. So things like getting equipment in the home or transitioning the patient to a new care setting can take longer because of the conflict that's happening. And that was the case in this example. This was shared by a social worker in the hospice program who shared that this family, they'd been divorced for quite some time, but she wanted complete control over finance and guardianship. The son said that she was evil, the mom was evil. The mother said that she had to get a restraining order on the son. The son said he got a restraining order on the mother, and it was a big mess. The patient wanted to go to the nursing home, and the son wanted him to go home with him, but she, the ex-wife, didn't want him to go home with him. He eventually did get to the nursing home, but it was quite some time before he got there. In the meantime, you can imagine that he's not getting the care that he really needs, and it's creating a lot of stress and decision-making for everyone involved. The next consequence is that the patient's wishes or quality of care may be jeopardized in some way. So they may not be able to live or die in their location of choice. They may not get particularly loving care or quality care because of the tensions within the family. And this example was shared by a hospice professional. She said about an experience with a wife who's the caregiver with an alcoholic husband. And I can't imagine what she said to him when they were just alone. You did this to yourself. You get what you deserve. It's like you reap what you sow. He just didn't get a lot of loving care at the end, care from the heart and that peaceful, loving death. So because of that conflict and because of the history of alcohol use and the relationship issues that brought along with it, now that he's end of life, the quality of care that he's getting from his primary caregiver, his wife, maybe it isn't as high as what most people would hope for. So it has that kind of consequence. Another consequence is just increased distress, which isn't surprising. Distress for the patient, distress for other family members, distress for the healthcare team. So anxiety, depression, stress, tensions that kind of can create difficulties for people. And in this case, some actual physical issues that a caregiver shared. I know I've had more migraines in the last 18 months than I've had in the last 3 or 4 years before that. I don't sleep much or well, and that's affecting my work, and that sometimes it's really hard to stay awake during the day. I have very little patience anymore, and I pretty much cry at the drop of a hat. So the conflict and the caregiving situation for her actually manifested in some physical distress and some health complications. Family relationships may be severed, either permanently or temporarily. So that was a theme that we identified, that in many cases the conflict was so significant that people actually broke off ties in their relationships. And that was the case in this clear example of an adult daughter who's talking about her sibling. I've tried to pull her back so many times on behalf of mom, and I can't take the beating anymore emotionally. When mom dies, I'm done. She better watch the obituaries because I'm angry, really deep down inside. I've shut the middle sister out. I've cut the cord. So because of her sister's lack of involvement, lack of ability to participate, and the tensions around that, she's saying that that relationship is over starting now and after the patient dies. And then the final one was just diminished support for the patient or caregiver. So sometimes conflict can result in less support for people who actually really need a lot of support at that point in time. The patient needs a lot of support, their primary caregiver needs a lot of support, but that support may be lacking before and after the death because of the conflict that has taken place. So this was a professional sharing about a family she worked with. The patient wasn't accepting of her situation and started yelling. She was pushing her daughter away. Her daughter wants to be there, but she can't take her mother anymore. She doesn't want to visit as much now. So the tension and the conflict is resulting in a lack of support for the patient. So this is basically our model. And I want to share with you just briefly some of the things that we've been talking with professionals about in terms of implications. But does anybody have any questions or comments about the themes that surfaced in our data? Yeah.
Yeah, I get a sense that in most of these cases, there wasn't a proxy or power of attorney done, right? So that there's still dispute about who has the say.
Right.
So do you have any evidence that having that proxy appointed would help to avoid conflict?
Right. I think it can help avoid conflict, and that's actually one of the implications here that we'll mention is the need to really encourage advanced planning and having advanced directives. Is that kind of what you're talking about? Yeah, power of attorney. So definitely that's something that can help prevent conflict situations from unfolding. Not all the time, because sometimes the conflict is related to other things too. You know, a prior history of abuse, or somebody who struggled with alcoholism for years and years and has alienated the rest of the family. So it can be other dynamics, but advanced planning can certainly help to prevent some things that are due to communication issues and incongruent perceptions about what should take place. Yeah. So maybe I should go ahead and share these, because you already identified one. And when we've been going out and talking with professionals, I wanted to just state that we've been actually talking about these implications much more in depth, and having activities and things that we do to kind of help them prepare to do these things more, but I'm just going to briefly go over what they are. One is that we feel there's a need to promote more awareness and acceptance of death and dying overall. Because we live in a death-denying kind of medical culture, people are often unprepared for when these things are happening. People haven't communicated about it. We have kind of closed communication about death and dying. Workplaces aren't that supportive of it. And so when things happen, it just, again, creates kind of that context for conflict, whereas if we had more natural, open, accepting attitudes about death and dying, people wouldn't be kept alive on life-sustaining measures so long, and there wouldn't be all these invasive treatments taking place, and there wouldn't be the sense of urgency so much around death and dying. So we've been talking with professionals about just being more aware of promoting more openness and acceptance of death and dying. Advanced care planning, which I just mentioned, and the need to really help people to facilitate good discussions about planning for the future, not just filling out documents, not just filling out a power of attorney for healthcare. That's a good start, but going beyond that and talking in a very concrete way about other things that might need to be planned for, and helping to open up the channels of communication with the family before it's a crisis kind of situation. We've been talking with professionals about more clearly screening for or assessing for family conflict, using some of the indicators or themes that were brought forward in our study as kind of risk factors. So we've been working with them to kind of develop more of awareness of those risks so that they are then better equipped to respond to them. We've talked about then integrating them more into the plan of care. So in hospice and other programs, there are plans of care where they identify the patient's and family's issues and then what the goals are. Oftentimes those are around physical issues. The patient has anxiety, so we're going to give this medication and monitor. There's pain medication for this particular issue. We're suggesting that they also care plan these social issues, these relationship dynamics, so that the healthcare team is aware of them and then has goals and strategies built in for how to respond in a more deliberate way. wrong way, sorry. We've talked about helping them to communicate more with who the patient identifies as family. So oftentimes, providers talk with one key family member, and they assume that that family member is going to share good information with everyone else involved. But we know that that's often not the case. They might guard some of that information. They might have a conflict with a sibling, then they're deciding not to share with them. They might not interpret that information accurately themselves. So we're suggesting that with the patient's permission, of course, that the professionals might do a better job of communicating with multiple family members so that they all have good information. Family conferencing. There's a lot of literature out there about conducting family meetings, family conferences, to help with some of these things, to help people get accurate information, to help people facilitate better planning, and to address family members' emotional needs that might surface. And in many programs, professionals do this.
Please, the library will close at 8 p.m. If you have any materials you wish to check out, please take it to the main floor circulation desk now. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
You're fine here. We can always leave us.
Yeah, I was warned that that would happen. Yeah. So. Okay. So just promoting and encouraging family meetings more extensively might be something that can ward off conflict, and not just doing it after the fact when things are already heightened, but doing it in a more proactive way. And then lastly, we've just been talking with professionals in general about conflict management techniques, mediation, how to de-escalate, and just basic communication strategies. So we've been doing some training on those types of things and helping to prepare professionals to address and to do those things specifically with families who are experiencing conflict. Okay, so again, we go into these things a little bit more in depth, obviously, with longer sessions, but I thought you might find it interesting, kind of some of the things that we're doing out there in the professional community. So in closing, nope, did it wrong. Well, what it says is, and I don't know how to work this, what it says is questions, comments, and I encourage you to identify implications for your own life, as well as if you work in the end-of-life realm in some way, implications for your professional life. So what questions do you have for me, or what comments do you have about this research? Yeah.
How well do you think families can do the implication part, approach of having conflict?
How well can families do?
Would they have to do that?
Yeah, some families do and some families don't. You know, and one of the things that we've been talking with professionals about is sometimes the conflict is not amenable to change. You know, sometimes they're going to see it in families and there's not a lot that can be done about it other than maybe buffer some of the negative effects and provide more support and reassurance and validation and listening. But sometimes change isn't possible. And all you can do is try and support family members the best you can with the resources you have. Yeah, other comments? Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that I faced these kinds of decisions with two parents that have now passed. And one of the things that caused the most anxiety in my family were differences in religious beliefs of the various siblings.
Okay.
This really didn't come out until very near the death experience itself. And at that point, there was a lot of tension. Is there a lot of literature out there on that issue itself?
There's not a ton of literature out there on that. There's literature out there on how religious, spiritual beliefs can influence advanced care planning and some of that stuff, but there's not a lot out there on religious differences and family conflict at the end of life. This is probably some of the first stuff where it's identified as a component or a contributing factor to that.
It started to show itself when certain members of my family suggested that we do as much invasive procedures as possible to save life. Others, including myself, said what's most important is mom's care and her health and how she feels,
right.
How does she feel. And so that started to open up some of those old, belief wounds that we had within the family. I'm sure others, may have experienced that kind of thing before. But it can be really a chasm that's very difficult to cross.
Right. Differences in how to approach life-sustaining measures and treatments can really be affected by people's spiritual belief systems. Yeah.
My mother is 95, and she is lucid and very clear about not having her life extended beyond, no extraordinary means to have her life extended. And she has everything planned in terms of the religious service and whatnot all, and there really isn't room for anybody else to say anything, which I think is great. There's no conflict. She's even purchased her own coffin. I mean, it's, so I think a big part of it is the planning, but fortunately, my mother was very responsible, and she was lucid.
Yeah.
Along, sometimes there's dementia before these decisions have been made. And the conflict is that the designated sister agreed to care for her and is being paid, and resents any offers of help. Well, that's fine. It's just that the rest of us don't want to be afterward accused of, you didn't do it.
Right.
It's very interesting, and I worry because I think my caregiver sister is beginning to suffer from dementia, but I'm not sure. But my mother insists on staying with her anyway, so then I think, well, it can't be too bad, because where my mother we've all offered to care for her. So sometimes people say things that they don't mean, or they're looking for sympathy, but when you try to offer help, it's like, you're saying that I'm not doing a good job.
Right. So there
So
can
it's
be.
really, it is, and when you got to the last section, I thought, really, there are solutions offered, but I think you're right, there are no solutions.
Right.
And you do the best you can, and you have to let it go
Right.
before you become more a part of it.
Right. And you can plan ahead as much as you can, and you can encourage that open communication as much as you
My
can.
mother will decide when she goes to a nursing home, thank you very much.
Right.
If she's still lucid.
Right. Yeah, and sometimes the best you can do when it can't be changed is to try and see the other side, to see the other person's point of view, and to have empathy and understanding, because you may not be able to change that person's attitude.
No.
Yeah.
And try to maintain your own mental health and hope to be around to offer help should the situation change.
Right.
But it's always about control, it seems to me.
Yeah, a lot of control issues in families, a lot of guarding of what they want to see happen. And it sounds like in this case, guarding the caregiver role too. She wants to be the one in that situation to have that role.
In fact, I said what a good job she was doing, but if she needs help, I'm here. And you have misjudged me completely. I am perfectly capable of it. And I'm fine.
Right. And there may not be anything you can do to change